Dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin. My dear fellow Germans, a sudden commotion has come over the German people. Now even those circles are beginning to stir, which until now have been deaf to the constant warnings that we have been trying to address to the mass of our people, almost without interruption, for the past 3 years.
In recent weeks, AI-generated translations of Hitler's speeches have gone viral, reaching millions around the world. People are hearing Hitler's words in their own language for the first time, and many are asking, how can this be happening? Why are his ideas resonating with so many today? In this video, we'll explore the reasons behind this unexpected appeal, expose how Hitler's true ideology has been misrepresented, and show how AI is bringing his dangerous ideas to new audiences. Most importantly, we'll reveal what the antidote to his ideology is. Because, yes, Hitler was wrong, and accurately examining his policies doesn't mean we're excusing his crimes. I have to point this out because there are some bad actors out there. Anyway, when I went through college, I was taught that Hitler only put socialism in the name to trick the workers, that he privatised the industries, crushed the trade unions, and was working for the capitalist corporations and shadow interest groups. It was the capitalists, I was taught, who were the racists, and that the reason why he was against the Jews was because he was a capitalist. And it's true that The Economist magazine in the 1930s and 1940s incorrectly assumed that when Hitler sold business shares, this meant that privatization was occurring. The state was getting out of the economy. But in reality, the Nazi Party loyalists marched into the industries and took them over from within. And so, when they did sell the shares, they remained in control. The policy wasn't privatization, it was Gleichschaltung, forced synchronization, which is a nationalization of all businesses and social groups. Heavy social regulations impacted every industry. Price controls were imposed on every good and service. There was a central distribution of goods and central planning boards for coal, textiles, timber, batteries, paper and steel, amongst many others. The beekeeping and bowling clubs, the canary breeders and the stamp collectors, the youth organisations, the yacht clubs, the media, the economy, the schools, the trade unions, the police, everything was synchronised with the state, nationalised by the state, socialised by the state. Between the 30th of January and 14th of July 1933, the Nazis had coordinated all social institutions, apart from the churches and the army, into a vast and still inchoate structure run by themselves. They had purged huge swaths of culture and the arts, the universities and the education system, and almost every other area of German society, of everyone who was opposed to them. I've done numerous videos on this, but in short, Hitler was not a capitalist. In fact, the reason Hitler hated the Jews was because he saw them as capitalists, just like Karl Marx did. Who were the bourgeoisie? For Karl Marx and Hitler, the bourgeoisie were the Jews. And this sentiment is captured in the AI speeches.
Therein lay a grave danger for Jewry. If the broad mass of the then forming labour force had come into national hands and had then seized the nation as a true social catalyst, if the liberation of the individual estates had taken place organically step by step, and if the state form had later been based on this, then what many hoped for on November 9th, 1918 would have come about: a national social state. For socialism as such is anything but an international creation. As a noble conception, it has grown exclusively in Aryan hearts and reaches its intellectual apotheosis only in Aryan minds. It is completely foreign to the Jew. He will always and forever be the born private capitalist of the most exploitative kind, and it is no coincidence that the great pillars on which some later mistakenly tried to build the foundation of a so-called people's enlightenment were all, without exception, opponents of the Jews.
Hitler also said that the Jewish capitalists were the puppet masters behind Marxism as well, which he said was working for the benefit of the capitalist Jews. In other words, he thought Marxism was a Jewish plot that only put socialism in the name to trick the workers. So both capitalism and Marxism were Jewish, and he was calling for a new way, a third position between the two. A socialism on the national, racial level. His was a third position, a third positionism that was neither left nor right. And so when these mainstream media outlets state that the far right is using AI to sell Hitler to a new generation, it's not the far right or the right doing this, it's the third positionists. When they talk about neo-Nazis or conservatives or right-wing extremists, they're totally off the mark. Hitler wasn't right-wing and he wasn't conservative. He was a revolutionary socialist. Therefore, socialism was integral to Hitler's ideology and political system. It wasn't added on later just to trick the workers. It was the foundation. Hitler also wasn't capitalist. He hated capitalism, which is what he saw as Jewish, and yet, because he's been branded far right by the historians, the politicians, many teachers, and the media, the impression people have is that Hitler is a capitalist, and capitalism is to blame. In addition to that, certain topics aren't allowed to be discussed in the modern world. The media is neither free nor honest. It's bought and paid for by the state, which is why it puts a massive spin on everything. All this censorship and lies culminates in the feeling that we, the people, are not being heard. And so the tension has reached a boiling point. So when people listen to Hitler speak, when they hear what he was actually saying, his words resonate with them. They've been lied to. And because Hitler is willing to address the issues we're not allowed to discuss, they believe him when he points the finger at the capitalists, the Marxists, and the Jews. The traditional left-right political spectrum is outdated. It's worthless. I'm branding Hitler a third positionist, but only for a lack of a better term. In reality, he combined socialism with nationalism and wasn't afraid to be openly racist. And it is for these reasons that Hitler appeals to socialists, nationalists, and racists. You don't have to be all three. If you're just a socialist, Hitler is saying exactly what you want to hear. And it's not because he's lying, he genuinely is a socialist. He wants a form of socialism that works for the German people, rather than a form of socialism that works for what he calls the international stock exchange capitalist forces.
I began to study again, and thus it was that I first came to understand perfectly what was the substance and purpose of the life work of the Jew Karl Marx. His Capital became intelligible to me now for the first time. And in the light of it, I now exactly understood the fight of the Social Democrats against national economics, a fight which was to prepare the ground for the hegemony of a real international and stock exchange capital. The Marxist leaders, whose business consisted in deceiving and misleading the public, naturally hated most of all a movement whose declared aim was to win over those masses which hitherto had been exclusively at the service of international Marxism in the Jewish and stock exchange parties. The title alone, German Labour Party, irritated them. The internationalization of our German economic system, that is to say, the transference of our productive forces to the control of Jewish international finance, can be completely carried out only in a state that has been politically Bolshevized. But the Marxist fighting forces, commanded by international and Jewish stock exchange capital, cannot finally smash the national resistance in Germany without friendly help from outside.
So, if you're a socialist listening to this, and you're frustrated by the lack of progress towards your unworkable utopia, Hitler is telling you to open your eyes and see that it is the Judeo-bourgeoisie that is hindering you. He's saying, don't fall for the lies of the Judeo-Marxists or Jewish international finance, and embrace a true socialism, a national socialism that actually has your interests at heart, apparently. Can you see how that message might be appealing to you? Or, if not to you, your friends who are socialist? Yes, Hitler says bad stuff about the Jews, but that's not the reason why people are surprised at what he's saying. They know he hates the Jews. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that they weren't expecting to hear everything else that he says. And what he's saying resonates with them. Most people are socialist, or at least are pro-welfare state, and are for their community, their nation. Well, a nation is a society is a nation. So socialism is nationalism, nationalism is socialism. And the idea of race itself is a social idea. It comes from social Darwinism. A race is a society and is a nation. Racism, socialism, and nationalism are all the same thing. Modern audiences may not have made this connection. They've not realised that the same ideas that lead to the welfare state also lead to gulags and gas chambers. They don't understand what Hitler stood for. And because of the censorship and lies, there's been a massive distortion of history. It's not just the modern conservatives or whatever, what you want to call them. It's the modern socialists as well who are susceptible to fall for Hitler's ideology. This stuff is appealing to you, and it's made worse by the fact you'd never even been exposed to Hitler's speeches before. Mein Kampf is banned on Amazon. There's social shame in even talking about this stuff, and you're unlikely to read the works of Hitler yourself for fear that you'll be tricked into believing him. So when AI is used to translate Hitler's speeches into English and languages other than German, you're hearing Hitler's words for the first time, and they're nothing like what you'd expect them to be. They resonate with people who have this idea that we should all come together and embrace each other and look after one another in a people's community, a Volksgemeinschaft, because that idea and Hitler's idea are one and the same. The problem isn't the AI translated speeches themselves. The problem is the false narrative that's been pushed for decades and continues to be pushed. The problem is the censorship that drives the National Socialists and Fascists underground, leaving you defenceless and susceptible to their ideas when they do emerge. And so, now that the problem has been outlined, I want to give you the solution to it. This could be a whole video in itself, and one day soon I will be making that video. But in a nutshell, I'm going to give you two major answers to Hitler's ideology today, out of many, starting with point number one. We are human, and what separates humans from the animals is our ability to think. If we hold a certain view in our minds, we can change that view. Outside of car crashes and other life-threatening events, we do not operate on our animal instincts. Our minds are what make us human. The National Socialists, racists, and social Darwinists treat us like cattle or breeds of dogs. Once a member of a certain race, always a member of a certain race. Once a member of a certain class, always a member of a certain class. They believe that your culture is determined by some divine force before you were even born. But because we are human, and because we can think, change our minds, and operate independently, we are not just our skin colour. Our thoughts are not determined before we are born. We can live and learn and experience and grow. We can integrate the knowledge we discover of the world around us and change our views for the better. What the National Socialists do is deny our humanity, deny our ability to think. Yes, you might be born into a certain family that has certain beliefs, and you might even have grown up to embrace those beliefs. But the fact you have a brain, and the fact that you could use that brain to grow and learn, means that you have the potential to change those beliefs. I'm not saying you should change those beliefs, but that you could if, those beliefs turn out to be wrong. And so yes, you could fall into a certain belief system or a certain culture or religion or ideology, but that doesn't mean you will necessarily stay there. Therefore, saying that someone is predetermined to act in a certain way because they came from a certain background, nation, race, gender, or whatever, isn't correct because it denies the one thing that makes us human, our minds. They deny our humanity and lower us to the level of dogs and cattle. And so, if you are human and if you use your brain, then you are not a breed of dog. You are not a type of cattle. And you are not your skin colour. You are not an animal. You are not a race. You are a human, and therefore an individual. Point number 2 can be summed up with the phrase, the short-term gain hides the long-term cost. Let me just repeat that. The short-term gain hides the long-term cost. Think of a row of dominoes. When you knock down the first one, the others fall over too. And if I place something in between the dominoes so that you can only see the first and the last dominoes, let me make sure I get this right, the domino effect still occurs whether you see them all fall over or not. So, with this in mind, let me ask you a question. Why is it that when people graduate from university, they can't find jobs? Why is it that you need 15,000 years of experience to apply for a low-skilled, low-pay cleaner job? Why is it that graduates end up unemployed or stuck at Starbucks for years and competing with people who never went to university? Where are all the entry-level jobs? Well, what you're seeing is the final domino. Let me just get that right so you can see. Yeah, the final domino. What you're not looking at is the first domino, the cause of all of this. The first domino can be summarized in 2 words. Minimum wage. All jobs below minimum wage are deleted, including entry-level jobs. And the people who would compete for those low-paying jobs are now competing for the jobs at minimum wage and higher, which takes the power out of the hands of the employees and puts the power in the hands of the employers. The result is frustration with the current system, a breakdown in employee confidence, employer abuse, overwork, underwork, low wages, mass long-term unemployment, and a host of other problems. And all that was because of minimum wage. And as I said, the short-term gain hides the long-term cost. You say you want a minimum wage to help the workers, but what you don't realise or don't see is the knock-on effects. You don't see the domino effect that has an impact down the line. The short-term gain hides the long-term cost. The whole of economics can be reduced to a single lesson, and that lesson can be reduced to a single sentence. The art of economics consists at looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group, but for all groups. The most frequent fallacy by far today is to concentrate on the short-run effects of policies on special groups and to ignore or belittle the long-run effects on the community as a whole.
But to consider all the chief effects of a proposed course on everybody often requires a long, complicated and dull chain of reasoning. Most of the audience finds this chain of reasoning difficult to follow, and soon becomes bored and inattentive. The bad economists rationalise this intellectual debility and laziness by assuring the audience that it need not even attempt to follow the reasoning or judge it on its merits, because it is only classicism, or laissez-faire, or capitalist apologetics, or whatever other term of abuse may happen to strike them as effective.
In other words, what is blamed on the free market? Low pay, low productivity, mass long-term unemployment, high rents, high house prices, job dissatisfaction, inflation, poor product quality, pollution, poor and costly healthcare, bad pension systems, giant corporations and monopolies, agenda-ridden media companies, and a host of other things, are actually the result of state intervention in the market. Every policy that a socialist calls for is in fact the cause of the problem that they are trying to solve. They call for rent control to lower the rents, and then wonder why rents end up being higher than they were before rent control, and why there are slumlords and housing shortages. They don't realise the knock-on effects of their policies. They just want to save society, and that's great. But the short-term gain hides the long-term cost. Socialism doesn't work. Socialism is bad for everyone, the rich and the poor. A child is dependent upon their parents. So if you steal from the parent, you steal from the child. And if you tax the rich, you tax the poor. And so, when I hear the Marxist or National Socialist arguments for using socialism to help the poor, the answer is that they're not helping the poor. They're hurting the poor. It is the free market, the very thing they're fighting against, that helps the poor. People have been mistaught, misled, and deceived into believing that social intervention in the economy or society is good. It is not. It hurts the very people they're trying to help. And if you haven't read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, or Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, then I highly encourage you to do so, because the answer to all variants of socialism, including National Socialism, is in being educated in how economics actually works. National Socialism presents a pro-worker initiative, but in reality, socialism serves as a means to enforce economic control rather than liberate working people. The fixed wages they enacted were a mechanism to consolidate state power over industries. It wasn't about empowering workers, but about subordinating both labour and capital to state interests. Hitler knocked over the first domino and disrupted the balance of supply and demand. This action led to a cascade of other issues: reduced business investments, rising costs, and a gradual decline in economic activity. And as each sector fell, the state had to step in more and more, propping up businesses and manipulating everything in order to maintain control. What started off as a seemingly positive initiative, policies to help the workers, set off a chain reaction that ultimately led to totalitarianism and a collapsing economy by the late 1930s, as detailed in my other videos on this topic, and the book Hitler's Beneficiaries by Götz Ali and Gunter Riemann's The Vampire Economy, among many others. In summary then, we've seen how AI is being used to bring Hitler's speeches to new audiences around the world, and why his ideas resonate with many people today. Contrary to mainstream portrayals of Hitler as far-right and capitalist, his ideology was rooted in a form of socialism that sought to combine racial nationalism with socialistic economic policies. This ideology appeals to modern audiences, particularly socialists, because of the frustrations caused by state intervention in the economy, which Hitler blamed on capitalism and Marxism, both of which he associated with the Jews. The solution to all this lies in recognizing our humanity, our ability to think and change, and in understanding the long-term consequences of policies that seem to offer short-term benefits. By studying the true impacts of economic intervention, we can see that socialism in any form leads to harmful outcomes, while the free market fosters growth and opportunity for all. These are some of the keys to countering the resurgence of harmful ideologies like National Socialism. So next time you see an AI video of Hitler or hear someone praising socialism, remember the short-term gain hides the long-term cost. Think critically, educate yourself, and don't fall for the lies that have trapped so many before you. If you found this video informative, please like, share and subscribe to stay informed on history, philosophy and how it all connects to today's world. Thanks for watching, bye for now.